Hi everyone, my name is Siniša Jović and I work as data engineer in ThinkSolver. Before I start, I need to ask you, how many of you never worked with pandas? Oh, okay, you're my audience. Okay, this is the agenda we will be following today. And for each step, we will show one example. First of all, about Pandas. Pandas is open source Python library. It's developed by Wes McKinney in 2008. It's pretty sure the most popular library for data manipulation. Provide built-in data structures that simplify data manipulation. And Pandas setup, if you choose an Anaconda distribution, it will come by default. If not, you need to install with pip install pandas, then import in script. Pandas, just a moment. Pandas have two types of data structures: series and data frames. Series is one-dimensional array. It's pretty similar to Python dictionaries, but key can be duplicated. Data frame, we can look at data frame as a dictionary of multiple series. And these are examples of each of them, one pandas series and one pandas data frame. So data frame is multi-dimensional array. If you ever worked with big data, you know how many data sources you can get, and that's the most important part of pandas and pandas possibilities. It can read CSV, comma-separated values files, TXT, Excels, JSONs, SQL, SAS, etc. Below its example of reading any data. You can you don't need to have data on your local machine where you're running pandas. You can read through FTP, and after we loaded our data, the best practice is to take a look at the table we have. You can do that with the .head function. If I remove the number 4 in brackets, it will show us 5 rows because that's the default values. Also, if you wanna bottoms rows, you can use tail function. These few slides help us to get familiar with data sets. And there is a real wide range of built-in functions for that. For example, .shape will return us a tuple with two values. First value is number of rows, and second value is number of columns in that data frame. Data frame .describe is usually used for numerical tables because it returns maximum average sums and percent frequency of for each column in that data frame. Data frame info is something. It's something that pandas developers use almost use very often. It returns in the first row. It returns type of data structure we have. In this case, is data frame. Second row is a range of index and shows how many rows we have. Third row is columns. Then each column is listed and says how many valid values for each column we have and type of values in that columns. Also at the bottom is memory usage. Okay, when you work with data, the type of values is very important, and that's what people get when they get some errors. For example, you can't do any time series manipulation if your time series timestamp column is object, not data time type. You can't do any mathematical aggregations if also is object, and the object in Pandas is Pandam to string. So you need to cast any type. For example, in this particular data frame, quantity is supposed to be integer as it is, but if you want to convert it to string, you can use code in example. And if you want to return it to integer, just replace string with integer in brackets. Okay, with data time we will be meet a little bit later. Just to return this, you can see all columns have 10,000. Total 10,000 values, except customer ID. It has a little fewer, and there's a missing values. So very important is to handling missing values. And the way you are going to handle missing values depends on your data set and what you want to get from your data set. The easiest way to look at how many missing values in each column you have is the code sample I provide you in the left bottom is null brackets dot sum brackets. It will summarize all missing values for each column, and it will show you the type. Actually, it returns you series. To handle missing values, there's again wide range of built-in functions as a drop now or fill now. Parameters in those functions are, for example, axes that can represent columns and rows. 0 is for rows, 1 is for columns, and it will. If you write like this, drop now axis equal 0, it will drop all rows where find non-values, entire rows. In place equal true, make sure that the next iteration through the data frame it will stay dropped those columns. If we exclude in place parameter in next iteration, next call of that data frame, non-values will be returned. Also, there is a subset parameter, and which received as values name of columns, and if you provide columns where which have non-values, it will drop just rows where that columns has non-values, not any columns. With fill now you can keep those rows or columns, but but fill those non-values or replace it with any values you want. In this case, is replaced with value 1, but you have to think of your data type and what you want from your data type. If you replace with 1, it will you will get a bad output. For example, if you need sum of that columns or subtract, but if you replace with zeros, you can't do multiplication or divide. So be careful with that. Also, there is a few methods like forward fill, back fill. It will take value of the next rows with true values, not missing values. Okay. Also, there is many methods to manipulate with strings. Actual objects in Pandas, like rename and replace, split, etc. To rename columns using dictionary is strongly recommended, where you provide as a key old name of columns and value is new name that you want to replace. Also, again, in place .true to keep those renaming. You can add suffix, prefix, and whatever you want. Replacing values is a little bit interesting. If you there is a parameter regex, and I'm not sure if you noticed in the country column we have in this top of data frame Germany value, and when you use string replace function for that column, we can choose if regex will be true or false, and on that depends if we will replace the whole string or whole value or just a part of value. If regex is true, then in this case we'll replace many with empty string, so it will basically delete many from any string found in those in that columns. But if we put regex equal false, it will be nothing here because there is no country many. Anyone who works with big data, with huge amount of data, know that our local machines can have a trouble with handling all those data, and can have a problem with processing. So you can create a sample, or you can filtering unnecessary rows or columns. If you want to choose some desired columns, it's pretty simple. Just put into square brackets all the columns, and it will follow the order you inputted, and desired rows can be filtered by many ways. The one is shown here, and if you want to choose multiple values, if you want to filter by multiple values, you separate it each in one brackets. Okay, handling time series today, where amount of data is very huge, and there is also very huge amount of real-time data. Time series is really important, and Pandas is really powerful tool for handling time series. And it's very usual to have timestamps in a dataset. From data time import, everything in this case is recommendation. And as I said before, before you start to work with time series, you need to cast every time series columns to data time type, and after that you can parse weeks, weekdays, split into date and time separately. Use time delta to manipulate with time ranges, etc. One example is here above the table, where I create new column called new data time. I just subtract 8 hours from original data time column. To attach this merging, and it's pretty simple to SQL joining. You just don't have left outer, right outer. You have 3 type of join: left, right, inner, and outer. I created manually one simple data frame with with 2 columns, country column and continent. And I merged it with data frame we had previously on the country column inner, and the output is below. Group by and aggregation is to use any group by aggregation method, you first need to check if value type is good. Of course, you cannot aggregate strings, as I said, with some mathematical operations, and that's when we usually came back to .info function to see if types are good. And there is a sample of how I create a date, just a date column from data time, and in the next code line I'm grouping by date, country column, and continent, and use aggregation on again Python dictionaries are very useful. In Pandas, you can provide for each column in one function. You can provide for each column a different type of aggregation. You can quantity column sum, and find mean of unit price column. And as I saw in agenda, the last step was basic plotting pandas, but it's really simple, of course, as everything previous. But pandas have a built-in plot method, but for something advanced plotting, I recommend you to use some additional libraries that can create plotting by adding layers one to each other. In this plot we see the how change the values of quantity column and unit price column through days, through dates showed in the first column. And that's just a code for I don't know how many characters, said 20 maybe. And that's pretty much it. You can ask questions for some detailed explanation of any of these steps previous.
Is this thing working? No. Okay. Apparently it's working. So you mentioned handling extremely large data sets, which with databases that expose APIs is fairly easy. But is there a way to subset, say, a massive file before downloading it? So not loading the whole thing, then subsetting it, then saving that to a file, and then subsequently loading it again. So say I find a massive database somewhere online, and it's not a structured database that I can access through an API. It's just a file. Is there a way for me to only load part of it before actually downloading?
Yes, you can read. Just a moment. Da vidim, ne radi. Aha. Okay. Okay. There's a way when you use this code line. There are many parameters I didn't include here. You can set how many rows it will be skipped. You don't have if your dataset has 2 million rows, you can use the first 50,000 or the last 50,000, etc. Is that you ask for?
Yeah, essentially, and it doesn't really care where the data is coming from, online, offline.
Yes, of course, if you have access.
Thank you.
That's it.